Many of the representatives of the criminal world participated in the Great Patriotic War. Based on modern cinematography, there may be a false impression that they fought only from under the stick, that is, in penalty battalions. This is far from true. Firstly, it was still necessary to try to get into the penal battalions, and most often there were people who really deserved to die and were given a chance to redeem themselves with blood. Secondly, many criminals themselves asked to go to the front, including the authorities and even the so-called thieves in law, the elite of the criminal world. To make it clear, about 10% of the total number of prisoners at the war were penalized. The rest of the convicts fought on an equal footing with others, in regular units. Among such authorities who went to the front, there was Vasily Pivovarov, nicknamed Pivovar, or Salawar. This man became famous not only at the front, but also at the so-called Bitch War, which took place in the post-war years. Then the convicts, who zealously adhered to the concepts, clearly did not like very much the criminals who took the side of the state and fought for it. In general, according to the rules, a self-respecting criminal should not have any ties with the official authorities. Especially, it concerns thieves in the law, because they are the real guardians, patriarchs of thieves' traditions and rules. This is the reason for the Bitch War, which took a huge number of lives. There is no detailed biography of Vasily Pivovarov. Sometimes he is even called a fiction or a collective image of all participants of the war between criminals. According to known data, Salawar before the Great Patriotic War was already an authority in the criminal world. It is said that he was even already a thief in law. He lived in Odessa and controlled this city. He was engaged in smuggling of various goods that went by sea here. But when the war broke out, Salawar threw away all his principles and forgot about thieves' notions. He was going to fight for the motherland, to the front, at the front. In addition to Salawar, many criminals went to war, wishing to defend their country and redeem themselves. Everyone fought differently and received different awards. Someone was happy to be free after the war, and someone seriously wanted to get awards, and someone even after the war continued to engage in criminal business. There were even those frontline criminals who received the highest honors. Hero of the USSR. Vasily Pivovarov went through the entire war, visited many parts of the front. He even managed to reach the rank of captain and was the commander of scouts. After the war was over and the frontline soldiers were released home, Vasily did not stay free for long, but went back to prison. War in prison. Salawar was not welcome in the zone, as he was now a bitch. Previously, such people were considered those who cooperated with the administration. Blatnie, of course, before the war, successfully crushed bitches. But after the war, they became so numerous that altogether they represented a very serious force. At the same time, it should be understood that the frontline criminalists are not ordinary representatives of the criminals, but first of all, people who have seen the horrors of war and learned to kill. All the more so that when they got to places not so remote, they united, and their brotherhoods were often stronger than those who adhered to the concepts. Before the war, Vasya Pivovar was in prison and was crowned. He was in jail, as one might guess, for his deeds in Odessa, for creating a smuggling network. He also went through the war and was the kind of person who was extremely difficult to break. We must give credit to many thieves who understood the need to protect the country and took the side of former frontline soldiers. In prison, Vasya Salawar gained unprecedented authority among the bitches. People united against the old system around the brewer. Even groups of people who called themselves pivovars began to appear. They quite effectively fought with the blatniks because they could count on the help of the administration of institutions. The latter benefited from such a war, since the authorities have long wanted to thin the ranks of the lawmen because too much power began to concentrate in their hands. The authorities decided to use Vasya Salawar and his team to the fullest. The lawmen had to be suppressed, while the blat culture and the criminal world had to be defeated. When problems in one camp were solved, Salawar and his team were sent to other large camps, Angarlag, Norilag, Siblag, and Vorkutlag. The administration would bring the gang at night, and the gang would immediately break into the zone and organize a real beating. Initially, the gang members were offered to give up their principles and notions. At the same time, there had to be present thieves and men. If there was a refusal, the person was tortured or even killed. By the way, it is said that Salawar knew and liked to torture, and that is why people unfit for him died very painfully and for a long time. The end of the bitch war. The Gulag authorities realized in the 1950s that there was nothing good in the war between bitches and thieves, especially for the state. The fact is that each of the groups, after their victory, tries to parasitize at the expense of various positive elements. That is, those who are ordinary prisoners, work hard, do not violate rules and order. It was decided that the joint detention of blatnois and bitches was inadmissible. They began to be distributed in different correctional institutions. Now the bloody massacre should not be provoked, but try to avoid it in every possible way. Also, the administration tried to control all the actions of the groups as much as possible. Over time, the clashes became less frequent and then ended altogether. It is said that after the bitch war, Thief Salawar came to an end. He was no longer needed by anyone, and moreover, he was considered extremely dangerous. They decided to take him out, but in a somewhat subtle way. The brewer was then in Magadan on the Indigirka. He was moved to a cell with the Blatniks. As you can understand, he had no normal life there. The thieves knew perfectly well who he was, and one day they simply killed him, from the back. During another showdown, a young prisoner nicknamed Gypsy simply jumped on Salawara from behind and stabbed him in the neck, after which he bled to death. Thus, in 1953, many prison-related events took place. There was a big amnesty, the end of the bitch war, and the death of Thief Salawar. Criminals at war. In total, the prisoners who fought for the USSR were about 1 million. Not all of them returned from the front. It is worth noting that most of the survivors after the war went back to prison. There were repressions, and their craft, which was practiced before the war, criminals could not forget. Many of those who after the war came to their senses began to work, start families, and rebuild the country. The criminals also distinguished themselves in battles with the Nazi invaders. Some of them even became heroes. Such famous criminals include Vasily Grigin, who received the nickname Kutuzov because he lost an eye during the forcing of the Danube. After the war, he had problems with socialization and was often imprisoned. He died alone, unwanted by anyone, and stripped of his awards. There was also another frontline soldier, to whom, incidentally, Vasya Pivovar was close, Anatoly Cherkasov. He had been involved in crime before the war, and he didn't quit even after it. He got into the thick of the bitch war and went through it completely. He forced others to completely reconsider Blatny concepts and change a lot of things. Cherkas was also known for the fact that he offered to roof officials, shopkeepers. In the USSR, they were engaged in illegal production and sale of goods, engaged in racketeering, etc. He was a respected thief in the law, although at one time he was considered a bitch, and many people were against him, including the notorious thief in the law Vasya Brilliant.